The night Adrian Cross walked into the wrong life, he had exactly $43 in his wallet and a wire that needed replacing. The woman sitting across from him controlled $3 billion in assets and a company on the verge of collapse. She thought he was her 8 o'clock appointment. He thought she was the restaurant manager. By the time either of them realized the truth, something had already shifted, something that would cost one of them everything and give the other a reason to hope again. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, the kind of rain that turned Seattle's streets into black mirrors and made every headlight look like a smear of paint. Adrian Cross stood under the awning of Luminaire, shaking water off his jacket and wondering, not for the first time, why rich people insisted on putting electrical panels in the most inconvenient locations possible. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't list prices on the menu. All glass and low lighting with tables spaced far enough apart that you couldn't hear your neighbors' conversations even if you tried. Adrian had been here twice before, both times through the service entrance. But tonight the manager had texted him the front door code because the panel was near the main dining room and they didn't want him dripping through the kitchen. He pushed through the heavy door, immediately aware of how out of place he looked. His work jacket had his name stitched on it. His boots squeaked on the marble floor. A woman in a black dress that probably cost more than his truck glanced at him with the kind of polite concern people reserve for things that don't belong. "Mr. Cross?" Adrian turned. The hostess was younger than him, mid-20s maybe, with her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Yeah, that's me. I'm here about the electrical. Right this way, please." She turned before he could finish, walking toward the main dining room with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he was already late for something. Adrian followed, confused. The manager had said the panel was accessible from the bar area, not the dining room. They wove between tables, past couples who didn't look up from their wine, past a group of men in suits who were laughing too loud to notice anything. The hostess stopped at a table in the corner, near the windows where rain streaked down in diagonal lines. "Your table," she said. Adrian stared at her. "I think there's been a... Can I start you with sparkling or still water?" "I'm not here to eat. I'm here to fix..." But she was already gone, moving back toward the front with the same efficient stride. Adrian stood there, hand still raised mid-sentence, feeling like he'd walked into the wrong movie. The table was set for two, candles burned in small glass holders. There was a wine glass at each setting that looked too delicate to actually use. He should leave. Find the manager, clear this up, get to the actual work he'd come here to do. His daughter's babysitter charged by the hour, and Mia had school in the morning, which meant bedtime in 3 hours, which meant he needed to be done here and home in time to read her the next chapter of the book they'd started. Adrian was turning to go when he saw her. She sat down across from him without asking, setting a small leather portfolio on the table beside her wine glass. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of face that was hard to read, beautiful in a way that seemed engineered rather than accidental. She wore a gray suit that fit her like it had been made for her, because it probably had been. "You're late," she said. Adrian blinked. "I'm not... Traffic?" "No, Doesn't matter." She opened the portfolio, pulling out a slim tablet. "I only have an hour, so let's make this efficient. I've already ordered for both of us. You don't have allergies, do you?" "Look, I think there's been a mistake." She glanced up at him, and for the first time seemed to actually see him. Her eyes moved from his face to his jacket, to his boots, and back again. Something flickered across her expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something out of place. "You're not Daniel Reeves," she said. "No. Who are you?" "Adrian Cross. I'm the electrician." The woman sat back in her chair, and Adrian watched her process this information. Her face gave away almost nothing, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "The electrician," she repeated. "Yeah, I'm supposed to fix a panel near the bar." The hostess thought, I don't know what she thought. The woman looked past him, toward the front of the restaurant where the hostess was seating another couple. Then she looked back at Adrian, her expression unreadable. "Sit down," she said. "I should really..." "Sit." It wasn't a request. Adrian sat, mostly because he was too confused to do anything else. The chair was more comfortable than it had any right to be. The woman closed her tablet and set it aside. She folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring finger bare, Her nails painted a dark red that looked almost black in the candlelight. "What's your last name?" she asked. "Cross. I already said." "First impression, Mr. Cross. What do you think is wrong with me?" Adrian stared at her. "Excuse me?" "You have 60 seconds. Tell me what you see." This was insane. He should get up, find the manager, do his job, and go home. But there was something in the way she looked at him, not challenging exactly, but testing, like she was running an experiment and he was the variable. "You haven't slept well in 3 days," Adrian said. "You're drinking wine, but you don't want it. You're waiting for someone who's important enough to make you nervous, which doesn't happen often. And something's wrong, something big enough that you're sitting here at 8 o'clock on a Thursday instead of wherever you'd rather be." The woman's expression didn't change, but she went very still. 45 seconds, she said. "Not bad." A waiter appeared, setting down 2 plates. Some kind of fish that Adrian didn't recognize, arranged on the plate like a piece of art. The waiter poured wine into both glasses and disappeared again. "I didn't order this," Adrian said. "I did. You said there was a mistake." She picked up her fork. "Consider this my apology." "I don't need—" "Then consider it payment for your time. 1 hour. Answer my questions honestly, and I'll make sure you're compensated for the inconvenience." Adrian should say no. Every instinct told him to say no. But he looked at this woman, the stranger who had somehow ended up across from him in a restaurant that cost more per meal than he made in a day, and found himself curious. What questions could possibly matter enough to buy a stranger's time? "Okay, Bo," he said. She smiled, and it was the first genuine expression he'd seen on her face. "My name is Isabella Laurent. I own a company called Nexus Holdings. Have you heard of it?" Adrian shook his head. "Good," Isabella said. "That means you won't lie to impress me. Do you know anything about corporate finance?" "No." "Structural engineering?" "Basic electrical systems. I can wire a house, fix a panel, install a generator. That's about it." Isabella cut a piece of fish, though she didn't eat it. "I have a problem, Mr. Cross. A significant one. In 6 days, my company undergoes a routine financial audit. This audit will reveal that our subsidiary acquisition structure has been systematically misrepresenting debt liability for the past 18 months. Adrian had no idea what most of those words meant in that order. "Is that bad?" he asked. "It's catastrophic. If exposed incorrectly, it triggers a cascade effect that could collapse 4 separate divisions and eliminate approximately 200 jobs. Did you know about it?" "Not until 3 days ago." "Did you cause it?" Isabella finally looked at him directly, and Adrian saw something raw beneath the careful control. "No," she said. "But I'm responsible anyway." They sat in silence for a moment. Rain drummed against the windows. Somewhere across the restaurant, someone laughed. "Why are you telling me this?" Adrian asked. "Because in the last 72 hours, I've spoken to 6 different advisors, 3 lawyers, and 2 consultants who all have a vested interest in telling me what I want to hear. You, Mr. Cross, have no reason to do that. You don't know me. You don't need anything from me. You're just a man who walked into the wrong room at the wrong time." "Or the right time," Adrian said quietly. Isabella set down her fork. "What? Maybe it's the right time. Maybe that's why you're telling me instead of sending me away." She studied him with an intensity that made Adrian feel like he was being read in a language he didn't understand. "Tell me about your life," Isabella said. Adrian laughed. "That's not a small question. I'm buying your time. Humor me." So Adrian told her. Not everything. He wasn't stupid enough to spill his entire history to a stranger, but enough. He told her about Mia, about being a single father, about the juggling act of work and parenting and trying to build something stable out of pieces that never quite fit together the way they were supposed to. He told her about choosing the electrician path because the hours were flexible and the work was steady, about learning the trade through YouTube videos and community college courses while Mia slept. Isabella listened without interrupting, her food growing cold on her plate. "Your daughter," she said when he finished. "How old?" 6, 7 in October. "Her mother?" "Not in the picture. Hasn't been since Mia was 2. "By choice?" "Hers or mine?" Isabella's lips quirked. "Either." "Mutual," Adrian said. "She wanted a different life. I wanted Mia. Sometimes people want things that don't fit in the same room." "That's a generous way to put it. I've had time to practice being generous about it." Isabella reached for her wine glass, then stopped. Instead, she pushed it away slightly, as if putting distance between herself and the decision to drink it. The audit, she said, the one I mentioned. The people conducting it are looking for exactly the kind of structural flaw that's been hidden in my company. If they find it the wrong way, they'll interpret it as intentional fraud. The penalties would be devastating. But it wasn't intentional? No, it was incompetence compounded by oversight. But proving that requires restructuring how the information is presented. So restructure it. It's not that simple. Why not? Isabella leaned forward slightly, and Adrian caught a hint of something. Perfume, maybe, or just the scent of expensive fabric. Because the people who created this mess are the same people who would have to fix it. They have reasons to protect themselves, which means they have reasons to present solutions that minimize their exposure rather than solve the actual problem. Adrian thought about this. You need someone who doesn't care about protecting themselves because they weren't involved in the first place. Yes. Someone who can look at the structure without any agenda except figuring out what's actually wrong. Yes. Someone, Adrian said slowly, like an electrician who understands systems and circuits and what happens when things are wired wrong. Isabella smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Are you offering, Mr. Cross? I don't know anything about corporate finance, but you understand systems. You understand how one failure can cascade into another. You understand how to trace a problem back to its source. Adrian picked up his wine glass, then set it back down. He wasn't much of a drinker, and certainly not wine that probably cost more than his electric bill. This feels like a trap, he said. It's not. You're a billionaire asking an electrician to solve a financial crisis. That doesn't seem strange to you? Everything about tonight is strange, Mr. Cross. That doesn't make it wrong. They looked at each other across the table. Two people who had no business being in the same room, let alone having this conversation. Adrian thought about Mia, about the babysitter waiting at home, about the panel he was supposed to fix. He thought about the careful, controlled way Isabella held herself, like someone trying not to fall apart in public. I need to make a call, he said. Isabella gestured to the windows. Take your time. Adrian stepped outside into the rain, pulling out his phone. The babysitter answered on the second ring. Hey Sarah, I'm running late. Can you stay until 10? Sure thing. Mia's already asleep. We finished her homework and she had dinner. You're a lifesaver. I'll pay you extra. Don't worry about it. Everything okay? Adrian looked back through the window at Isabella, who sat alone at the table, staring at her wine glass like it might have answers. I don't know yet, he said. When he came back inside, Isabella had her tablet out again, pulling up documents and charts that meant nothing to Adrian at first glance. Before we start, she said, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to show you is confidential. If it leaked, it would cause significant damage. I'm not going to leak anything. I believe you, but I need you to say it anyway. I won't share what you show me with anyone. Isabella nodded and turned the tablet toward him. This is the acquisition structure for our subsidiary network. 3 main divisions, each with multiple holdings. The debt obligation flows through a series of interconnected agreements that were supposed to distribute liability evenly. Adrian looked at the chart. It reminded him of wiring diagrams, lines connecting boxes, showing how current flowed from one point to another. What's supposed to happen? He asked. Each division carries a proportional share of the total debt. When one division generates revenue, it partially offsets the debt load for the others. It's a balanced system. But someone restructured the flow 18 months ago. Instead of distributing evenly, it's been accumulating in one division while being underreported in the others. Adrian traced his finger along one of the lines. So it's like putting all your electrical load on one circuit. Eventually, something's going to blow. Exactly. Which division is carrying the load? Isabella tapped the screen. Nexus Residential, our property management arm. It's been absorbing debt while showing minimal revenue because the properties are long-term investments. On paper, everything balances. In reality, the liability is concentrated in a way that violates our credit agreements. What happens when the auditors find it? They'll see it as fraud, intentional misrepresentation to secure better lending terms. Even though it's not? Intent doesn't matter if the evidence looks damning enough. Adrian studied the chart again, looking for the pattern. His work didn't involve billion-dollar companies, but it did involve systems. understanding how pieces connected, where pressure built up, what happened when something failed. Show me where the restructuring happened, he said. Isabella pulled up another document, this one dense with numbers and dates. Adrian didn't understand half of it, but he focused on the timeline, the sequence of events. Here, he said, pointing. This is where it changed. What happened in March of last year? We acquired 3 new properties, commercial real estate in Denver. Who approved the financing? Our CFO at the time, Martin Chen. Where's he now? He left the company 8 months ago, took a position at a competitor. Adrian sat back. Did he leave before or after this started becoming a problem? Isabella went very still. Before. But the problem wasn't visible yet. To you, maybe. What if he knew? You're suggesting he deliberately created a structural flaw and then abandoned ship before it surfaced. I'm suggesting someone who understands these systems well enough to restructure them also understands how long it takes for the damage to show. If he left before it became visible, he had a reason. Isabella's jaw tightened. That would mean this wasn't incompetence, it was sabotage. Does that change anything? It changes everything. If this was deliberate, then proving it means we can demonstrate that the company itself isn't at fault. A rogue employee was. Can you prove it? Not in 6 days. They sat in silence. The restaurant had gotten quieter, the dinner rush winding down. Their waiter had stopped asking if they wanted anything else. What if you don't try to prove it? Adrian asked. Then we take the blame. No, I mean, what if you don't try to hide the problem at all? What if you present it to the auditors yourself before they find it? Isabella frowned. That would still trigger the cascade effect. Would it? If you show them the problem and show them you've already started fixing it, doesn't that change how they interpret it? You're suggesting we volunteer evidence of our own failure. I'm suggesting you control the narrative. Right now, you're waiting for them to find something wrong and then trying to defend it. That makes you look guilty even if you're not. But if you come to them first, if you say, we found this, here's what happened, here's how we're correcting it, that changes the dynamic. Isabella stared at him. That's insane. Is it? Every advisor I've spoken to has said the exact opposite. They all say minimize exposure, provide only what's requested, never volunteer damaging information. Those advisors work in your world, Adrian said. They know the rules of corporate finance. I don't. I just know what happens when you try to hide a bad wire. Eventually, it causes a fire anyway. Better to shut down the circuit, fix the problem, and turn it back on correctly. Isabella picked up her wine glass, took a single sip, and set it down again. Her hand was shaking slightly. If I do this, she said quietly, I'm betting my entire company on your instinct. Then don't do it. I'm just a guy who fixes electrical panels. You're the one who runs a billion-dollar company. Trust yourself. Myself isn't doing very well lately, Mr. Cross. Adrian understood that feeling. The weight of being the only one responsible, the only one who couldn't afford to get it wrong. What does your gut tell you? He asked. Isabella closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. That everyone around me has an agenda except you. That's not true. I have an agenda. Which is? Getting home to my daughter before she wakes up and wonders where I am. Isabella laughed, a short, sharp sound that might have been a sob if she'd let it be. I can't pay you, she said. Not officially. Not for this. I didn't ask you to. Why are you helping me? Adrian thought about that. Why was he sitting here, in a restaurant he'd never be able to afford on his own, talking to a woman whose life existed in a completely different stratosphere? It would be easy to say it was the right thing to do, or that he felt sorry for her, or that he was curious about a world he'd never see otherwise. But the truth was simpler and more complicated at the same time. Because you asked, he said, and because nobody should have to carry something this heavy alone. Isabella looked at him for a long moment, and Adrian saw something shift in her expression, a kind of recognition, like she'd been searching for something and just found it in the last place she expected. I need to make a call, she said. She stood and walked toward the back of the restaurant, her phone already to her ear. Adrian sat alone at the table, staring at the cold food and the tablet full of information he barely understood. What was he doing? His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. All good here. She's sleeping like a rock. Adrian texted back a thank you and checked the time. 9:15. He'd been here over an hour, and he still hadn't fixed the panel he'd come to repair. Isabella returned, sliding back into her seat. Her composure had returned, that careful control settling back over her features like armor. "I've made arrangements," she said. "My assistant will send a car for you tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. "For what?" "To help me prepare the presentation for the auditors. If we're going to do this your way, I need someone who can look at the structure without prejudice and tell me what they see." "I don't—" "Please," Isabella said, and it was the first time she'd asked instead of commanded. "I need help, real help, not people protecting their positions or their reputations, just someone who gives a damn about solving the actual problem." Adrian thought about saying no, about walking away from this surreal conversation and going back to his regular life where nothing was this complicated and nobody asked him to save billion-dollar companies. But he looked at Isabella, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion beneath the expensive clothes, the fear beneath the control. "Okay," he said, "but I need to be home by midnight. Non-negotiable." "Agreed." "And I have no idea if I can actually help." "Neither do I, Mr. Cross. But you're the first person in 3 days who's offered an idea I didn't think of myself. That's worth exploring." They stood. Isabella picked up her portfolio and her phone. Adrian grabbed his jacket. "The panel," he said. "The electrical panel I was supposed to fix. I'll have someone take care of it. That's not— Consider it handled. You've given me something far more valuable than a working circuit." They walked toward the front together, an odd pair that made the remaining diners glance up with barely concealed curiosity. At the door, Isabella turned to him. "Tomorrow," she said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." "Where?" She handed him a card with an address embossed in silver. "My office, top floor." Adrian looked at the card, then at Isabella. "This is crazy." "Yes," she agreed. "Completely." Then she was gone, disappearing into a black car that had appeared at the curb as if summoned by thought alone. Adrian stood in the rain, holding a business card for a company he'd never heard of until an hour ago, wondering what he'd just agreed to. His phone buzzed again. The restaurant manager, finally asking where he was. Adrian texted back that there'd been a scheduling confusion and he'd come back tomorrow to fix the panel. Then he walked to his truck, climbed inside, and sat there while rain drummed on the roof. Somewhere in the city, a woman was preparing to bet her company on the advice of an electrician. And somewhere across town, his daughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her father had just walked into something that felt like the beginning of a story he couldn't yet see the end of. Adrian started the truck and drove home through the rain, the business card sitting on the passenger seat like a question he hadn't figured out how to answer yet. The black car arrived at 6:55 the next evening, which gave Adrian exactly 10 minutes to question every decision that had led him to this moment. He'd spent the day on a residential job in Ballard, replacing an outdated breaker box in a house that smelled like cat food and regret. Normal work. The kind where he knew exactly what he was doing and nobody's future hung in the balance. Between pulling wire and testing circuits, he'd checked his phone approximately 24 times, half expecting a message from Isabella saying the whole thing had been a mistake, that she'd found real help, that she didn't need an electrician playing consultant. No message came. Mia had noticed something was off when he picked her up from after-school care. She'd asked twice if he was okay, and both times he'd said yes in a way that made it obvious he was lying. 6-year-olds had a radar for that kind of thing. "You seem weird," she'd said over dinner, pushing chicken nuggets around her plate. "Weird how?" "Like you're thinking about something big." "I'm always thinking about something big. That's what dads do." "Like what?" "Like making sure you eat your vegetables." She'd rolled her eyes at that, but she'd eaten the carrots. Small victories. Now he stood on the sidewalk outside their apartment building, watching the car idle at the curb. It was the same one from last night, dark and expensive and completely out of place in this neighborhood, where most vehicles had at least one panel of mismatched paint. Sarah had agreed to stay late again, bless her, though she'd given him a look that suggested she was keeping a running tab of questions she'd ask eventually. Adrian had promised to be back by midnight, same as yesterday, and had meant it. The driver's window rolled down. A man in his 50s with graying hair and a patient expression looked out. "Mr. Cross?" "Yeah." "Miss Laurent is expecting you." Adrian climbed into the back seat, which smelled like leather and something else. Money, maybe, if money had a scent. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly, he barely felt it. They drove through downtown, past the stadiums and the waterfront, into a part of the city where the buildings got taller and the streetlights got brighter. The driver didn't try to make conversation, which Adrian appreciated. He needed the silence to prepare himself for whatever was about to happen. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of architecture that looked like it belonged in a movie about the future. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and abstract art that probably cost more than Adrian's truck. He gave his name to the guard, who checked a list and handed him a visitor badge. 40th floor, the guard said. Elevators are to your right. The elevator was the quietest Adrian had ever been in. No mechanical hum, no cable noise, just a faint sense of upward motion and floor numbers ticking past on a digital display. When the doors opened on 40, he stepped out into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought personality was a weakness. Everything was white or gray or chrome. Even the plants looked expensive, like they'd been selected for aesthetic value rather than their ability to stay alive. A woman sat behind the desk, younger than Adrian, with her hair in a sleek ponytail and a smile that was professional without being warm. Mr. Cross, Miss Laurent is in her office, straight back, last door on the left. Thanks. He walked down a hallway lined with photographs of buildings, properties, he guessed, part of Isabella's empire. Each one was framed in simple black. Each one looked like it cost millions. Adrian had rewired apartments in some of these buildings, crawling through cramped utility spaces while the people who lived above him paid rent he couldn't imagine. Isabella's office door was open. He knocked anyway. Come in. The office was bigger than Adrian's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made everything look small and manageable. Isabella sat behind a desk that was almost comically large, her laptop open, papers spread out in careful arrangements that suggested she'd been working for hours. She looked different than she had last night. Still put together, still wearing a suit that probably cost a month of Adrian's salary, but there was something looser in her posture, like she'd let some of the armor slip. You came, she said. You sent a car. That doesn't always guarantee results. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Sit. We have a lot to cover and not much time. Adrian sat. The chair was designed for comfort and power. It supported his back while making him feel like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Before we start, Isabella said, I need to tell you what happened after you left last night. Okay. I called my senior team, told them I was considering a new approach to the audit situation. They were not receptive. How not receptive? My general counsel threatened to resign if I proceeded. My CFO said I was making an emotional decision that would destroy the company. My head of investor relations suggested I was having some kind of breakdown. Adrian winced. So this went well. I fired the general counsel. You what? Gave him a severance package and accepted his resignation effective immediately. Isabella's expression was neutral, but there was steel underneath. He was the one who advised covering up the problem in the first place. If I'm going to bet the company on transparency, I can't have someone in the room whose primary strategy is concealment. That's bold. That's desperate. She leaned back in her chair. I have 5 days, Mr. Cross. 5 days to restructure how we present 18 months of financial data in a way that demonstrates good faith rather than criminal negligence. My team thinks I'm insane. My board of directors doesn't know yet, but they will by Monday. And when they find out I've been taking advice from, no offense, an electrician, there will be consequences. So why am I here? Isabella looked at him directly, and Adrian saw the same exhaustion he'd noticed last night, amplified by whatever had happened in the past 24 hours. Because everyone else is trying to save themselves, she said, and you're the only person who suggested saving the company instead. She stood and moved to a large table near the windows, where papers and charts were laid out like pieces of a puzzle someone had given up on. Adrian joined her, looking down at the spread of documents that represented Isabella's empire. This is everything, she said. Every acquisition, every debt instrument, every financial relationship that connects to the problem. I need you to tell me what you see. Adrian studied the layout. It reminded him of the panel he was supposed to fix at the restaurant. Complex, interconnected, one mistake away from disaster. Walk me through it, he said, like I'm 6 years old and you're explaining why the lights won't turn on. Isabella almost smiled at that. Then she began. She explained the structure of Nexus Holdings, how it had grown from a single property management company into a sprawling network of subsidiaries and holdings. She explained the acquisition strategy, buying undervalued properties and improving them through strategic investment. She explained the financing model, which relied on distributing debt across multiple entities to maintain favorable lending terms. Adrian listened, asking questions when something didn't make sense, watching how Isabella's hands moved when she talked about different parts of the company. She touched certain papers gently, like they represented something important. Others she tapped with her fingernail, dismissive or frustrated. "Here's where it breaks," she said, pointing to a cluster of documents in the center. "Nexus Residential, the division that's carrying the debt load. On paper, it's performing adequately. In reality, it's a bomb waiting to go off." "Show me the trigger." Isabella pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop, turning the screen so Adrian could see. Numbers filled the cells in neat rows and columns, but one section was highlighted in red. "This is the debt-to-revenue ratio for residential. It's been climbing for 18 months, but the way we've been reporting it makes it look stable. We've been offsetting the climbing debt with projected revenue from properties that haven't generated returns yet." "Projected revenue," Adrian said, "as in money you don't have." "Money we will have, eventually. These are long-term investments. But if the auditors see you're using money you don't have to balance debt you do have, they'll interpret it as fraud." "Yes." Adrian traced his finger along the numbers, following the pattern. "When did you realize this was happening?" 3 days ago. Our interim CFO, the one who replaced Martin Chen, was preparing for the audit and noticed the discrepancy. She brought it to me immediately. "She sounds smart." "She is. She's also terrified. If this collapses, her career collapses with it." "What about Chen, the guy who left?" Isabella's jaw tightened. "I've been trying to reach him since last night. He's not responding to calls or emails. His new employer says he's on vacation." "Convenient timing." "Very." Adrian stepped back from the table, trying to see the whole picture instead of individual pieces. "You said last night that restructuring the presentation could change how the auditors interpret this." "Yes. So instead of hiding the debt and projected revenue, you show it as what it is, debt that's currently unbalanced but being actively corrected." "That's the theory." "What's stopping you?" "Proving we're actively correcting it. Right now we don't have a plan. We have an intention. Auditors don't accept intentions." Adrian thought about this. In his work, intentions meant nothing. You either fixed the problem or you didn't. You either restored power or you left people in the dark. "What would a plan look like?" he asked. Isabella moved to a whiteboard on the far wall, picking up a marker. "Realistically, we'd need to shift the debt concentration from residential to the other divisions. Spread it back out the way it was supposed to be distributed in the first place." "Can you do that?" "Not in 5 days. That kind of restructuring takes months of negotiations with lenders, approval from the board, legal review." Pause. "What if you didn't actually do it? What if you just showed them the plan?" Isabella turned. "Explain." "You can't fix the structure in 5 days, but you can show them exactly how you would fix it, given time. You give them the roadmap. You say, here's the problem we found, here's how it happened, here's our plan to correct it, and here's the timeline for implementation. You're not hiding anything. You're demonstrating competence and good faith. That requires a legitimate plan, not just something we throw together to appease auditors." "Right, so make a legitimate plan." "In 5 days. You said you have a smart CFO. You said you have a team. Put them to work. Stop trying to hide the problem and start solving it." Isabella stared at the whiteboard, marker in hand. "If I present an incomplete solution, they'll tear it apart." "Then don't present an incomplete solution. Present a complete plan with an incomplete implementation. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment, marker cap clicking against her thumb. Then she started writing on the board, her handwriting sharp and precise. "Phase 1, she said, writing as she spoke. "Immediate disclosure to auditors. Complete transparency about the structural flaw and its origins." "Good. Phase 2, comprehensive debt reallocation plan with timeline. Show exactly how we move the liability from residential back to a balanced distribution." "How long would that actually take?" 6 months, maybe 8. Then say 8. Under promise, over deliver." Isabella nodded, writing more. Phase 3. Implementation oversight. External auditor assigned to verify each step of the reallocation. That's smart. Shows you're not trying to hide anything going forward. Phase 4. She paused, marker hovering over the board. Accountability measures, personnel changes where necessary. Like firing your general counsel. Like firing anyone whose incompetence or malice contributed to this mess. She turned to look at Adrian. That's going to make me very unpopular. You're already unpopular. Might as well be right about it. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and something in the room shifted. They weren't boss and employee, or billionaire and electrician, or even two people from different worlds. They were just two people trying to solve a problem that was bigger than both of them. I need to call my CFO, Isabella said. Get her started on building out the reallocation timeline. Now. Right now. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. She pulled out her phone, dialed, and put it on speaker. The woman who answered sounded tired. Ms. Laurent, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Change of plans, Rachel. I need you to come in. Bring your laptop and the full residential files. There was a pause. It's 7:30. I'm aware. This is urgent. How urgent? We're presenting to the auditors in 5 days. I want a complete debt reallocation plan ready by Monday morning. Another pause, longer this time. That's impossible. It's necessary. Will you help me or not? Rachel's exhale was audible, even through the speaker. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Thank you. Isabella ended the call and looked at Adrian. You should probably go before she gets here. This is going to get technical. I can stay, if you want. You have a daughter waiting at home. I have 3 hours before I need to be back. I can help. Doing what? You don't understand corporate finance. No, but I understand when someone's drowning, and I'm pretty good at throwing ropes. Isabella studied him, and Adrian watched her decide whether to accept help or send him away. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Pride versus pragmatism, control versus collaboration. Okay, she said finally, but if Rachel asks who you are, you're a consultant. I am a consultant. I'm just consulting about things I don't understand. That makes two of us. Rachel arrived 27 minutes later, slightly out of breath and carrying a laptop bag that looked heavy enough to require engineering approval. She was in her early 40s, with glasses and graying hair, and the kind of exhausted competence that came from years of holding things together through force of will. She stopped when she saw Adrian. Who's this? She asked. Adrian Cross, Isabella said. He's consulting on the presentation strategy. Rachel looked at Adrian, then at Isabella, then back at Adrian. Consulting from which firm? Independent, Adrian said, which was technically true. Rachel didn't look convinced, but she set down her bag and pulled out her laptop. Fine. What are we doing? Isabella explained the plan. Full disclosure to auditors, comprehensive reallocation strategy, external oversight, accountability measures. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression moving from skeptical to thoughtful to something that might have been cautious hope. This is insane, she said when Isabella finished. Yes. If we screw this up, we're done. Also yes. But it might actually work. That's what I'm counting on. Rachel opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet that made the ones Adrian had seen earlier look simple. Okay, let's start with the current debt distribution. You need to see exactly how bad this is. For the next 2 hours, they worked through the numbers. Rachel explained the financing relationships, the credit agreements, the contractual obligations that tied everything together. Isabella asked questions, challenged assumptions, pushed for clarity. Adrian mostly listened, trying to understand the shape of the problem even if he couldn't follow all the details. Somewhere around 9:30, Rachel hit a wall. I don't see how we move this debt without triggering penalty clauses, she said, gesturing at a section of her spreadsheet. These loans have specific covenants about debt-to-asset ratios. If we reallocate too much too fast, we'll be in violation. What's the threshold? Isabella asked. 30% shift in any 12-month period. So we spread it over 2 years instead of 1. That doesn't solve the audit problem. They'll want to see progress within 6 months. They were stuck. 3 people staring at a problem that didn't have an obvious solution. Adrian watched them go back and forth, throwing out ideas and shooting them down, getting more frustrated with each dead end. Finally, he spoke up. What if you don't move all the debt at once? They both looked at him. Explain, Isabella said. You're trying to fix the whole problem in one move. That's what's triggering the penalties. But what if you just fix enough of it to demonstrate good faith? Move 10 or 15% of the debt in the first 6 months, enough to show the auditors you're serious, but not enough to violate your agreements. Rachel frowned. That leaves the majority of the problem unresolved. For now. But you're not presenting a solution to the auditors. You're presenting a process. As long as the process is legitimate and moving in the right direction, they'll accept it. You don't know that, Rachel said. No, I don't. But I know that when I'm fixing a complex electrical problem, I don't try to rewire the entire building at once. I fix one circuit, test it, make sure it's stable, then move to the next one. Incremental progress with verification at each step. Rachel looked at Isabella. He's not wrong. I hate that he's not wrong, Isabella said, because it means this is going to take longer than I wanted. Would you rather take longer or crash the whole thing? Isabella didn't answer that. She turned back to the whiteboard, erasing what she'd written and starting over. This time the plan had more phases, more checkpoints, more room for adjustment. By 10:30, they had something that looked like a strategy. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Rachel had a framework for building out the reallocation timeline. Isabella had talking points for the auditors. Adrian had a headache from trying to follow financial concepts that seemed designed to be incomprehensible. I need coffee, Rachel announced. Anyone else? Please, Isabella said. Adrian checked his phone. 10:45. Sarah would be wondering where he was. I should go, he said. Isabella walked him to the elevator, leaving Rachel to gather her papers. They stood in the hallway, the overhead lights too bright after hours in the office. Thank you, Isabella said. I didn't do much. You did enough. You're doing enough. She hesitated, then added, Are you free tomorrow? I have work during the day, but I can come back in the evening. Same time? Yeah. The elevator arrived. Adrian stepped inside, then turned back. You're going to be okay, he said. This plan, it's solid. You just have to trust it. I'm not good at trust. Neither am I, but sometimes you don't get to choose. The elevator doors closed, and Adrian descended through 40 floors of expensive real estate, back to street level where his truck was parked next to cars that cost more than he'd make in a decade. He drove home through late-night traffic, his mind still processing everything he'd seen and heard. The scale of it was overwhelming. Billions of dollars, hundreds of jobs, an entire empire balanced on decisions that could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. When he got home, Sarah was asleep on the couch, a textbook open on her lap. Adrian paid her, added an extra 20 for the late hour, and walked her to her car. Then he checked on Mia, who was sprawled across her bed in the way only children could manage, taking up every inch of space despite being barely 4 feet tall. Her nightlight cast shapes on the ceiling, stars and moons and planets. Adrian sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to wake her, and let himself have one moment of quiet before tomorrow came with all its complications. His phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. We're presenting to the auditors Wednesday morning. I need you there. Adrian stared at the message. Wednesday. 3 days from now. He had jobs scheduled, clients who depended on him, a life that didn't include showing up to corporate offices to watch billionaires defend their empires. But he thought about the way Isabella had looked at him tonight, the way she'd listened when he spoke, the way she'd trusted him enough to change her entire strategy based on something he'd suggested. He texted back, Okay. Then he set his phone down, kissed his daughter's forehead, and went to bed knowing that whatever happened next, he'd already crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Seattle feel like it was wrapped in wet cotton. Adrian woke to Mia jumping on his bed, which was her preferred alarm clock and significantly more effective than any phone could ever be. Dad! 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 I'm awake. You're not awake. Your eyes are closed. He opened one eye. Now I'm awake. Can we make pancakes? Adrian checked the time. 7:15. He'd gotten maybe 5 hours of sleep, his mind refusing to shut down after everything that had happened at Isabella's office. But Mia was looking at him with that expression that made saying no impossible, so he dragged himself out of bed and followed her to the kitchen. They made pancakes together, which was less about cooking and more about Mia getting flour on every available surface, while Adrian tried to keep the smoke detector from going off. She talked the whole time, an endless stream of consciousness about school and her friend Emma and a boy named Tyler who'd said her drawing was stupid, but she didn't care because Tyler couldn't even draw a circle. Adrian listened with half his attention, the other half stuck on Wednesday morning, and what would happen when Isabella presented to the auditors. He hadn't told Mia about any of it. How could he? How did you explain to a 6-year-old that her dad was helping a billionaire save her company when he could barely keep their own finances stable? "You're doing it again," Mia said. "Doing what?" "Being weird, thinking about something big." Adrian flipped a pancake that was definitely burnt on one side. "Sorry, work stuff." "Is work stuff bad?" "No, just complicated." "More complicated than fixing lights?" "Way more complicated." She accepted this with the easy adaptability of children, then proceeded to drown her pancakes in enough syrup to constitute a health hazard. They ate together at their small kitchen table, which wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, and Adrian kept meaning to fix it but never found the time. His phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. "Can you come in today?" "We hit a problem." Adrian looked at Mia, who was making a face at him with her cheeks full of pancake. "What kind of problem?" The board found out. "They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning." Adrian's stomach tightened. "What does that mean for Wednesday?" "It means I might not make it to Wednesday. I need help preparing for tomorrow." He thought about his schedule. Sunday was supposed to be his day with Mia. They had plans to go to the aquarium, something they'd been talking about for weeks. She'd drawn pictures of fish and taped them to her wall in anticipation. "I have my daughter today. Can it wait until tonight?" The response took longer this time. "How old is she?" 6. "Bring her." Adrian stared at his phone. "To your office?" "Why not? I have a conference room she can use. There's Wi-Fi. We can put on a movie. Better than leaving her with a babysitter all day." It was possibly the worst idea Adrian had heard in a week full of questionable decisions. But he looked at Mia, who was watching him with that knowing expression kids got when they sensed something was happening. "How would you feel about skipping the aquarium today?" he asked. Her face fell. "But you promised." "I know, and I'm sorry, but something came up for work, and I need to go help someone. We can go next weekend instead." "You always say next weekend." That hurt because it was true. There was always another job, another bill, another reason why next weekend turned into the weekend after that. "What if you came with me," he said, "to where I'm working? They have movies you can watch, and afterward we can get ice cream." Mia considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "What kind of ice cream?" "Whatever kind you want." "Even the expensive kind with the cookie dough chunks?" "Even that kind." "Okay, but you still owe me the aquarium." "Deal." They got dressed and cleaned up the kitchen, which took longer than it should have because Mia insisted on washing the dishes herself, and Adrian didn't have the heart to tell her she was mostly just making them wetter. By 9:30, they were in the truck, heading downtown through Sunday morning traffic that was blissfully light. Mia pressed her face against the window, watching the city pass by. She'd been downtown before, but never to this part, where the buildings reached toward the sky like they were trying to escape the ground. "Where do you work?" she asked. "I don't work here. I'm helping someone who does." "Helping them fix lights?" "Something like that." "Is it a lady?" Adrian glanced at her. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you're being extra weird. You only get extra weird about ladies." "I'm not weird about ladies." "You are. Remember when that lady at the grocery store asked if you were single and you dropped the eggs?" "That was one time." "You dropped all the eggs, Dad. It was so many eggs." Adrian couldn't argue with that. He'd spent 20 minutes cleaning up eggs while the woman, who'd been perfectly nice and not remotely threatening, had apologized repeatedly and eventually fled the scene in embarrassment. They parked in the same garage as Friday night, and Adrian held Mia's hand as they walked to the building. The lobby was quieter on Sunday, just one guard at the desk instead of 2. Adrian gave his name and the guard made a call, then waved them through to the elevators. "This place is fancy," Mia whispered as they rode up to the 40th floor. "Very fancy." "Do rich people work here?" "Yes." "Are you rich now?" "No, baby, definitely not." "Then why are we here?" It was a good question. Adrian was still working on an answer when the elevator doors opened and Isabella was standing there like she'd been waiting. She'd dressed down for Sunday, jeans and a sweater instead of a suit, but she still looked like she belonged in a magazine spread about successful people who had their lives together. Her expression shifted when she saw Mia, something softening in a way Adrian hadn't seen before. "You must be Mia," Isabella said, crouching down to eye level. "I'm Isabella." Mia looked at her with the unblinking intensity of a child conducting an assessment. "Are you the lady my dad is helping?" "I am." "He says you have movies." "I do, and snacks. Do you like popcorn?" "Yes." "Then we're going to get along fine." Isabella stood and gestured down the hallway. "Come on, I'll show you where you can set up." She led them to a conference room that was bigger than Adrian's entire apartment. One wall was all windows with a view of the Sound, gray water stretching out to islands in the distance. There was a table that could seat 20 people and a screen mounted on the wall that was definitely designed for presentations, not children's movies. Isabella pulled out a laptop and set it on the table. "What do you want to watch?" Mia looked overwhelmed by the question, like someone had just asked her to solve a complex equation. "I don't know." "Do you like princesses?" "Sometimes." "Animals?" "Yes." "Perfect. I know just the thing." Isabella pulled up a streaming service and selected something animated with bright colors and talking animals. "Good?" "Good," Mia agreed. Isabella hit play, and the screen filled with cheerful music and cartoon characters. Mia climbed into one of the conference room chairs, which was so big her feet didn't touch the ground, and immediately became absorbed in the story. Adrian watched this interaction with something approaching disbelief. Isabella Laurent, billionaire CEO, setting up a movie for his daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't heard what we're dealing with." She gestured toward the door. "My office. Rachel's already there." They left Mia to her movie and walked down the hall. Rachel was indeed in Isabella's office, looking like she hadn't slept in approximately a decade. She had her laptop open and papers spread across every available surface. "The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow morning," she said without preamble. "We have 16 hours to prepare a defense for a strategy they're going to hate." "What did you tell them?" Adrian asked. Isabella moved to her desk, leaning against it rather than sitting. "I told them we'd identified a structural issue in the residential division and were implementing a comprehensive correction plan ahead of the scheduled audit." "How did they respond?" "Poorly. 3 board members demanded my resignation. 2 wanted to fire the entire finance team. 1 suggested we hire crisis management consultants, which is ironic considering we're in crisis because we listened to consultants in the first place." "What did you say?" "I said no to all of it. Told them I was handling the situation and would present a full briefing tomorrow morning." Rachel looked up from her laptop. "They're going to crucify you." "Probably." "I'm serious, Isabella. The board has the authority to remove you as CEO. If they think you're making this worse, they will." "Then we need to prove I'm making it better." Adrian sat in one of the chairs facing Isabella's desk. "Walk me through what they know versus what they don't know." "They know there's a problem with the residential division," Isabella said. "They know I've been working on a solution. They don't know I'm planning full disclosure to the auditors, and they definitely don't know I'm taking strategic advice from," she gestured at Adrian, "someone outside the traditional corporate structure. So tomorrow you need to convince them that transparency is the right move, while also convincing them not to fire me for making that decision without board approval." "Did you need board approval?" "Technically, no, but practically, yes. Major strategic decisions are supposed to go through board review." Adrian leaned back, thinking. "Okay, so you need to frame this as a decision that was necessary to make quickly, and now you're bringing them in as partners rather than asking permission after the fact." Rachel shook her head. "They're going to see that as manipulative." "Everything's manipulative if you say it the wrong way. But if Isabella presents it as, I found a critical problem, made an immediate decision to protect the company, and now I'm asking for your support in implementing the solution. That's different. That's leadership, not manipulation." Isabella and Rachel exchanged a look. "He's not wrong," Rachel said. "I'm starting to hate that phrase," Isabella muttered. She moved to the whiteboard, which still had Friday night's notes on it. "Okay, let's build the presentation. What do we lead with?" They spent the next 3 hours constructing an argument. Rachel provided the data, charts and graphs showing the debt concentration, the timeline of how it happened, the projected impact if left uncorrected. Isabella shaped the narrative, finding ways to explain complex financial concepts in language that didn't require a graduate degree to understand. Adrian asked questions, lots of them, playing the role of skeptical board member and forcing them to defend every claim. Around noon, Mia appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain. "The movie's over," she said. Adrian checked his watch, shocked at how much time had passed. "Sorry, baby, we got caught up. Are you hungry?" "Yes." Isabella stood immediately. "I'll order lunch. Mia, what do you like?" "Pizza." "Good choice. What kind?" "Just cheese." "Done." Isabella pulled out her phone and made a call, ordering pizza and asking for it to be delivered to the office. When she hung up, she looked at Mia. "It'll be here in 30 minutes. Want to help me with something while we wait?" Mia glanced at Adrian, who nodded. "Okay," Mia said. Isabella led her to the conference room and pulled up a blank document on the laptop. "I need to write something important, and I could use a second opinion. Can you read?" "Yes, I'm in first grade." "Perfect. Then you're exactly who I need." Adrian watched from the doorway as Isabella typed out the opening of her board presentation, then asked Mia if it made sense. Mia read it slowly, her finger following the words, then announced that she didn't understand what fiduciary responsibility meant. "That's because it's a stupid phrase," Isabella said. "What if I said being responsible for the company instead?" "That's better." "You're hired." They worked like that until the pizza arrived. Isabella typing, Mia reading, both of them collaborating on making the presentation clearer. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching his daughter help a billionaire simplify corporate language, and felt like he'd slipped into an alternate dimension where nothing made sense but somehow everything was working. Rachel noticed him watching. "She's good at this," she said quietly. "At what?" "Isabella. At being human. She forgets sometimes when she's in CEO mode, but put her with a kid and she remembers." "Does she have children?" "No, but she wanted them once, I think, before everything got so complicated." The pizza disappeared faster than seemed physically possible. They ate in the conference room, Mia telling Isabella about school and her friend Emma and the boy Tyler who still couldn't draw circles. Isabella listened with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions and laughing at the right moments. After lunch, Mia went back to watching movies. Isabella had queued up an entire playlist, and the adults returned to work. The board presentation was taking shape, but there were gaps, places where the argument felt weak or the data didn't quite support the conclusion. "The problem is here," Rachel said, pointing to a section about timeline. "We're saying we can reallocate 15% of the debt in 6 months, but we don't have concrete commitments from the lenders yet. The board's going to push back on that." "So we get the commitments," Isabella said. "By tomorrow morning?" "Why not? It's Sunday afternoon. We call them now, explain the situation, ask for preliminary agreements contingent on board approval." "That's insane. Everything about this weekend is insane. We're past the point of worrying about convention." Isabella started making calls. Adrian listened as she spoke to people whose names he didn't recognize, explaining the situation in terms that were both honest and strategic. Some said no. Some said they needed to think about it. 2 said yes, contingent on reviewing the full reallocation plan. By 4 o'clock, they had enough preliminary commitments to make the 6-month timeline plausible. Not guaranteed, but plausible. It was the best they could hope for given the constraints. "We need to practice the delivery," Rachel said. "Isabella, you're going to be in a room with people who want you gone. You can't show weakness." "I'm not planning to." "I'm serious. If you hesitate on any of this, if you show even a moment of doubt, they'll eat you alive." Isabella's expression hardened. "I know what's at stake, Rachel." "Then prove it. Run through the presentation like we're the board." So they did. Isabella stood at the whiteboard and walked through the entire argument, the problem, the solution, the timeline, the ask for board support. Rachel and Adrian played skeptical board members, interrupting with questions and challenges. "Why didn't you catch this earlier?" Adrian asked, channeling what he imagined a hostile board member might say. "Because the reporting structure was designed to obscure it," Isabella replied, "which is exactly why we're implementing new oversight measures as part of the correction plan." "That sounds like you're admitting incompetence." "I'm admitting that our systems had a flaw. Incompetence would be knowing about the flaw and doing nothing." "How do we know you're not just making this worse?" "Because I'm here, asking for your support, instead of trying to handle it alone." Because I'm bringing in external oversight to verify every step. Because I'm putting my own position on the line to do what's right for the company. Rachel nodded slowly. Better. But you're still too defensive on the last part. Don't make it about your position. Make it about the company. They ran through it again and again. Each time, Isabella got sharper, more confident, less reactive to challenges. By the fifth run-through, she was devastating, clear, precise, impossible to rattle. Mia appeared in the doorway again around 6, looking tired. "Dad, can we go home?" Adrian checked the time, surprised at how late it had gotten. "Yeah, baby, let me just grab my stuff." But Isabella shook her head. "Stay, please. I need to run through this one more time, and you're the best skeptic I have." Mia's exhausted. "The car can take her home. I'll have my driver drop her off with your babysitter." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." "Mia, would that be okay? Having someone drive you home while your dad stays here to help me?" Mia looked at Adrian, uncertain. "Will you be home for bedtime?" "I'll try." "That means no. It means I'll try really hard." Mia considered this with the gravity of someone making a significant decision. "Okay, but you have to read 2 chapters when you get home." "Deal." Isabella made arrangements with her driver, a different person than the one who'd picked Adrian up on Friday. The man arrived within 15 minutes, professional and patient, and Isabella walked them down to the lobby to make sure Mia got settled in the car safely. "She'll be fine," Isabella said as they watched the car pull away. "Thomas has 3 grandchildren. He knows what he's doing." "I know, it's just, I don't usually let other people handle that kind of thing." "The parenting part?" "Any of it." They rode the elevator back up in silence. When they returned to the office, Rachel had pulled up the final version of the presentation on the screen. "Last run-through," she said. "Then we're done for tonight. I can't think anymore." Isabella went through it one final time, and it was perfect. Clear, confident, impossible to argue with unless you were determined to find fault, regardless of facts. When she finished, Rachel closed her laptop. "That's it. That's the best we can do." "Is it enough?" Isabella asked. "I don't know, but it's honest, and it's smart, and it's more than anyone else would have come up with in 3 days." Rachel left around 7:30, gathering her papers and her laptop and her exhaustion. Isabella walked her to the elevator, and when she came back, she looked like someone who'd been running on fumes and just realized the tank was empty. "Drink?" she asked Adrian. "I don't really... I have whiskey, good whiskey, the kind you don't say no to." She led him to a small cabinet in the corner of her office and pulled out a bottle that probably cost more than Adrian's rent. She poured 2 glasses, neat, and handed him one. "To bad decisions," she said. "Is that what this is?" "Definitely. But sometimes bad decisions are the only ones worth making." They drank. The whiskey burned in a way that felt cleansing, like it was stripping away pretense and leaving only what was real. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said. "Sure. Why are you doing this? And don't say because I asked. There has to be more to it than that." Adrian thought about how to answer that. He could say something simple, something easy. But Isabella had been honest with him, so he owed her the same. "Because I know what it's like to be responsible for something you can't control," he said. "I know what it's like to make decisions that affect someone else's entire life, and to lie awake wondering if you got it right. And I know what it's like to need help and not have anyone to ask." "But you have your daughter." "That's different. Mia needs me. She doesn't have a choice. But this, you didn't have to ask me for help. You could have found someone qualified, someone who actually knows what they're doing. But you asked anyway, and that meant something." Isabella looked at him over the rim of her glass. "You are qualified, you know, not in the traditional sense, but you see things clearly. You don't get caught up in politics or positioning, you just solve the problem." "That's because I don't know enough to get caught up in anything else." "Maybe that's exactly why you're qualified." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking expensive whiskey and watching the city lights come on as dusk settled over Seattle. Adrian thought about Mia at home with Sarah, probably already in her pajamas, definitely annoyed that he wasn't there for bedtime. "I should go," he said. "I know." But neither of them moved. There was something in this moment, this quiet space between the chaos of the weekend and the uncertainty of tomorrow, that felt worth preserving for just a little longer. Finally, Isabella stood. Thank you. For today. For all of this. You're going to do great tomorrow. You don't know that. Yeah, I do, because you're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to be right. And that's harder to argue with. Isabella walked him to the elevator. When the doors opened, she reached out and squeezed his hand, a brief contact that said more than words could. See you Wednesday? She asked. I'll be there. The drive home gave Adrian time to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, he'd been a guy who fixed electrical panels and tried to keep his life from falling apart. Now he was somehow involved in saving a billion-dollar company from collapse, and he had no idea how it had happened. When he got home, Mia was indeed in her pajamas, sitting on the couch with Sarah and reading a book that was definitely above her grade level. You're late, Mia announced. I know, I'm sorry. You owe me 3 chapters now. 3? I had to add 1 for being late. Adrian couldn't argue with that logic. He paid Sarah and thanked her for handling the unusual evening, then carried Mia to bed and read her 3 chapters of the book they'd been working through. She fell asleep halfway through chapter 2, but he finished all 3 anyway, keeping his promise even though she wasn't awake to hear it. His phone buzzed as he was leaving her room. A text from Isabella. The board meeting went as badly as expected. But I'm still standing. Thank you for that. Adrian frowned. The meeting wasn't until tomorrow morning. What do you mean? I meant to type, we'll probably go. Wishful thinking, I guess. You'll be fine. Trust the plan. I'm trying. Adrian set his phone down and collapsed onto his own bed, fully clothed and too tired to care. Tomorrow Isabella would face her board of directors. Wednesday she'd face the auditors. And somewhere in all of that, Adrian would have to figure out how to go back to his normal life, where the biggest crisis was a blown circuit and the hardest decision was what to make for dinner. But tonight, lying in the dark and listening to the rain start up again outside, he wasn't thinking about normal. He was thinking about Isabella standing in front of hostile board members, defending a strategy that might save everything or destroy it completely. And he was thinking about the fact that he cared what happened to her, which was dangerous in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. Sleep came eventually, heavy and dreamless, the kind that pulled you under and didn't let go until morning arrived whether you were ready or not. Monday morning came too fast and too loud, Mia's alarm clock blaring at 6:30 like a declaration of war. Adrian dragged himself out of bed, made breakfast on autopilot, and got Mia ready for school while his mind stayed stuck on Isabella and whatever was happening in that boardroom right now. He dropped Mia off at 7:45, watching her disappear into the building with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Then he sat in the parking lot and checked his phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Nothing from Isabella, nothing from Rachel, just silence that felt heavier than it should. His first job of the day was in Fremont, replacing outlets in a renovated bungalow where the owner kept asking if he could add smart home features to wiring that was 60 years old. Adrian explained 3 times that you couldn't just retrofit modern technology onto ancient infrastructure without addressing the underlying system first. The owner kept nodding like he understood, then asking the same question in slightly different words. By noon, Adrian had installed new outlets, explained the limitations of old wiring systems more times than seemed necessary, and collected payment from a man who still looked confused about why his house couldn't instantly become a smart home. He sat in his truck eating a sandwich that had gotten warm in the sun and checked his phone again. One text from Isabella, sent 20 minutes ago. Still alive. Barely. They're calling a recess. We'll update you later. Adrian stared at the message, trying to read meaning into words that gave nothing away. Still alive was good. Barely was concerning. Recess meant the meeting wasn't over, which could go either way. He texted back, hang in there. Then he drove to his next job, a panel replacement in Capitol Hill, that should have been straightforward, but turned into a 3-hour ordeal when he discovered the previous electrician had done work that violated approximately 7 different codes. Adrian spent the afternoon fixing someone else's dangerous mistakes and trying not to think about boardrooms and audits and women who'd somehow become important to him in less than a week. His phone rang at 4:15. Isabella's name on the screen. Adrian answered. Hey. They didn't fire me. Her voice sounded raw, like she'd been talking for hours without water. But it was close. What happened? Can you come to the office tonight? I need to walk through Wednesday's presentation, and I can't do it with Rachel. She's too close to it. I need someone who will tell me when I'm being an idiot. I can do that. 7, okay. Yeah. Do you need me to bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe some of that unfiltered honesty you're so good at. She hung up before Adrian could respond. He finished the panel replacement, tested everything twice to make sure it was actually safe this time, and collected payment from a client who seemed genuinely grateful someone had fixed the disaster lurking in their walls. Sarah was already at the apartment when Adrian got home, having picked Mia up from after-school care. They'd made dinner together, spaghetti that was slightly burnt but edible, and Mia was working on homework at the kitchen table with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for things she actively hated. Math? Adrian asked, looking over her shoulder. Word problems. They're stupid. What's the problem? It says if Jenny has 5 apples and gives 2 to Mark, how many does she have left? But it doesn't say why she's giving Mark apples. Maybe Mark's mean. Maybe Jenny shouldn't give him anything. Adrian tried not to smile. The question's just asking about the math part. But the story part matters. You can't just ignore the story. She wasn't wrong. Adrian helped her work through the problems anyway, translating abstract numbers into scenarios that made sense to a 6-year-old brain. By 6:30, homework was done, dinner was eaten, and Mia was settled on the couch with a book that was still above her reading level, but she insisted on trying anyway. I have to go out for a few hours, Adrian said. Again? Yeah, Sarah's going to stay with you. Is it the same lady from yesterday, the one with the fancy office? Yeah. Is she your girlfriend now? Adrian nearly choked. What? No. Why would you think that? Because you keep going to see her and you get that look. What look? The look you get when you like someone, but you don't want anyone to know. Sarah was trying very hard not to laugh from the kitchen. Adrian gave her a look that clearly said traitor. I'm just helping her with work stuff, he told Mia. That's what you always say. There was no winning this argument, so Adrian kissed his daughter's forehead, promised he'd be back before bedtime, and escaped to his truck before she could ask more questions he didn't know how to answer. The drive downtown was slower than usual. Monday evening traffic thick with people heading home from jobs where the biggest crisis was a difficult email or a meeting that ran long. Adrian wondered what they'd think if they knew there were people like Isabella fighting to save entire companies from collapse, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives, while everyone else worried about parking spots and dinner plans. The building's lobby was busier than it had been on Sunday, actual employees coming and going instead of just security guards. Adrian rode the elevator to 40, now familiar enough with the route that he didn't feel completely out of place. Isabella's office door was closed. Adrian knocked. Come in. She was at her desk, still in the same suit she'd probably been wearing since 6 that morning, looking like someone who'd been through a war and wasn't sure if they'd won. There were papers everywhere, her laptop screen showing a document covered in red track changes, and a coffee cup that looked like it had been refilled too many times to count. You look terrible, Adrian said. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I meant you look exhausted. There's a difference. Isabella leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of being questioned, challenged, and told I was destroying everything my father built. Your father? He founded Nexus Holdings 40 years ago, grew it from a single property management company into what it is now. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited control. The board has never quite forgiven me for not being him. Adrian sat down across from her. What did they say about the audit plan? They hated it, called it reckless, unnecessary, self-destructive. 3 members voted to reject the strategy entirely and hire outside consultants to handle the audit response. But you're still CEO. Because 5 members voted to give me until Wednesday to prove the strategy works. If the audit goes badly, I'm out. If it goes well, I stay but under increased oversight. Either way, I've lost ground. You're still standing, though. That counts for something. Isabella opened her eyes and looked at him. Does it? Because right now it feels like I'm standing on ground that's about to give way. Adrian understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. Show me the Wednesday presentation. Let's make sure the ground holds. They moved to the conference room, the same one where Mia had watched movies yesterday. Isabella pulled up the presentation on the screen and walked through it from the beginning. The opening was strong, clear statement of the problem, acknowledgement of the severity, immediate pivot to the solution. But about halfway through, it started to lose focus, getting tangled in details that obscured the main message. Stop, Adrian said. Go back. Isabella backed up a few slides. There, that section about the implementation timeline. You're losing me. It's explaining how we'll execute the reallocation plan. I know what it's trying to do, but it's too complicated. You're giving them 10 steps when they only need to see 3. The auditors don't care about every single detail. They care about whether you have a legitimate plan and the capability to execute it. But if I don't show them the full process, then you show them the framework and tell them the detailed implementation plan is available for review. Don't drown them in information. Give them enough to trust you know what you're doing. Isabella stared at the slide, then deleted half of it. Better? Much better. They worked through the rest of the presentation, cutting unnecessary complexity and sharpening the core message. Every time Isabella started to over-explain, Adrian stopped her and made her simplify. It was the same process they'd used on Sunday, but this time there was an edge to it, a desperation that hadn't been there before. Around 8:30, Isabella's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her expression tightened. I have to take this. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Adrian could hear her voice through the glass, sharp and controlled, but couldn't make out the words. The call lasted maybe 3 minutes, and when she came back, she looked like someone had punched her. That was Martin Chen, she said. The CFO who left? Yes. Apparently he's heard about the audit situation. He wanted to offer his help. That's suspicious. That's what I thought. So I asked him directly, did you structure the debt concentration in residential deliberately? Do you know something we don't? What did he say? He denied it, said the restructuring was approved by the compliance team and was meant to optimize our lending terms. He seemed genuinely confused about why it's become a problem. Adrian thought about that. Do you believe him? I don't know. He sounded sincere. But he also sounded nervous, like he was worried about being blamed for something. Maybe he should be worried. Or maybe this really was just a series of compounding mistakes and nobody's actually at fault. Maybe I've been looking for a villain when the real problem is systemic failure. Does that change anything for Wednesday? Isabella sat down, suddenly looking more tired than Adrian had ever seen her. No, the plan stays the same. Full disclosure, comprehensive solution, external oversight. Whether it was malice or incompetence doesn't matter. The structure is still broken either way. They went back to the presentation, but Isabella's concentration had cracked. She kept losing her train of thought, stumbling over words she'd delivered perfectly an hour ago. Stop, Adrian said. You need to rest. I can't. Wednesday's in less than 40 hours and I'm not ready. You're as ready as you're going to get. Drilling it more isn't going to help if you're too exhausted to think. I'll sleep Wednesday night, after it's over. Isabella, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Adrian could see it in the way her hand shook slightly when she reached for her coffee cup, the way her eyes had trouble focusing on the screen. When was the last time you ate? He asked. She had to think about it. Lunch, maybe. That was 8 hours ago. I've been busy. Yeah, being busy doesn't cancel out hunger. Come on. He stood and held out his hand. Isabella looked at it like she didn't understand what he was offering. Where are we going? To get food, real food. Not whatever you've been surviving on from the vending machine. I don't have time. Make time. You're going to crash if you don't eat, and then Wednesday won't matter because you'll be unconscious. Isabella took his hand and let him pull her up. They took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the cool evening air. Adrian had no idea where he was going, but there had to be restaurants nearby in a neighborhood this expensive. They found a small Thai place 2 blocks over, the kind of restaurant that was trying to be upscale but hadn't quite gotten there. The hostess seated them at a table by the window, and Isabella stared at the menu like it was written in a language she didn't speak. Just order for me, she said. Adrian ordered pad thai and green curry, safe choices that were hard to mess up. When the waiter left, Isabella leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. I'm so tired, she said quietly. I know. I don't mean physically, I mean tired of fighting, tired of having to prove myself every single day, tired of being told I'm not enough. Adrian didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't good at comfort, had never learned the right words to make someone feel better, but he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and Isabella opened her eyes and looked at him like he'd just offered her something she'd forgotten existed. "You're not fighting alone," he said. "You know that, right? You've known me for 5 days. So? Time doesn't dictate whether you matter to someone." Isabella's eyes got wet, and she pulled her hand back to wipe at them quickly. "Sorry, I'm not usually like this." "Like what?" "Falling apart in public." "You're not falling apart, you're just being human." The food arrived and they ate mostly in silence. Isabella picked at her curry like she was going through the motions of eating without really tasting anything. Adrian watched her and tried to figure out when this had stopped being about helping someone with a problem and started being about something else entirely. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said, breaking the quiet. "Sure." "What happened with Mia's mother?" "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'm curious." Adrian set down his fork. It wasn't a question he got asked often, and when people did ask, he usually deflected. But Isabella had been honest with him about her father, about the board, about everything. He owed her the same. "Her name was Claire," he said. "We met when I was 24 working construction and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. She was studying art history at UW, had this whole vision of moving to New York and working at a museum. We were together for 3 years before Mia happened." "Happened?" "Claire didn't want kids. We talked about it early on, agreed it wasn't in our plans. But sometimes plans change whether you want them to or not. When she got pregnant, we tried to make it work, convinced ourselves we could do both, raise a kid and still chase our separate dreams. But after Mia was born, it became clear pretty fast that wasn't realistic." "What did you do?" "I chose Mia. Claire chose New York. We didn't fight about it. There was no drama. We just acknowledged that we wanted different things, and those things couldn't coexist in the same space. She signed over custody, said goodbye, and left when Mia was 2. I haven't heard from her since." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Choosing Mia?" "Never. But I regret that Mia doesn't have a mother. I regret that I couldn't be enough different things at once to make everyone happy. Mostly, I regret that love wasn't enough to solve the problem." "Love never is," Isabella said softly. "No, but we keep acting like it should be." They finished eating and walked back to the office building, the streets quieter now, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Isabella seemed steadier after food, some of the exhaustion replaced by determination. "One more run-through," she said when they got back to the conference room. "Then I'll let you go home." This time the presentation was sharp. Isabella didn't stumble, didn't over-explain, didn't let doubt creep into her delivery. She was commanding without being aggressive, clear without being condescending. If Adrian had been an auditor, he would have believed her. When she finished, he clapped slowly. "That's it. That's what you need to show them on Wednesday." "You think it's enough?" "I think it's honest, and I think it shows you're not trying to hide anything. That matters more than perfection." Isabella closed her laptop and sat down across from him. "I need to tell you something." "Okay. After Wednesday, whatever happens, if this works or if it doesn't, I want you to know that you changed something. You gave me a perspective I didn't have, and that's not something I can repay. I'm not asking for repayment, I know, but I'm telling you anyway, because people don't say things like that enough. We assume people know they've made a difference, and then we never actually tell them." Adrian didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, and Isabella seemed to understand that words weren't necessary. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Mia's asking for you. Should I tell her you're almost home?" Adrian checked the time. 9:40. He'd promised to be home for bedtime, and he'd blown it again. "I have to go," he said. "I know. Thank you for tonight, for all of it." They walked to the elevator together. When the doors opened, Isabella reached out and hugged him. A quick embrace that was over almost before it started, but Adrian felt it in his chest like something had shifted into place. "Good luck Wednesday," he said. "I'll see you there, right?" "You really want me there?" "I need you there, as a reminder that this isn't about ego or saving face. It's about doing the right thing, and you're good at reminding me what that looks like." The elevator doors started to close and Adrian caught them. 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock. Don't be late. He wasn't sure if she was joking or serious, knowing Isabella, probably both. The drive home felt longer than it should have, the city stretching out around him in ways that made distances feel elastic. Adrian thought about Wednesday morning, about sitting in a room full of auditors while Isabella bet everything on transparency. He thought about what would happen if it failed, if the company collapsed and people lost jobs, and Isabella lost everything her father had built. Mostly, he thought about the fact that he cared more than he should about someone he'd known for less than a week. Sarah left as soon as Adrian got home, shooting him a look that suggested she had questions but was saving them for later. Mia was still awake, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling with the kind of dramatic disappointment only children could manage. "You missed bedtime," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it. Are you going to keep going to see the fancy lady?" Adrian sat on the edge of her bed. "Probably not after Wednesday. This is a temporary thing." "What happens Wednesday?" "She has an important meeting. I'm going to be there to help." "And then you'll stop being weird?" "I was never being weird." "You were definitely being weird." Adrian couldn't argue with that. He was being weird. Everything about the past 5 days had been weird. But it would be over soon, one way or another, and he could go back to his normal life where weird wasn't part of the daily routine. "Get some sleep," he told Mia. "You owe me 4 chapters." 4? I added another one for missing bedtime. Adrian read her 4 chapters, and she fell asleep during chapter 3, but he finished all 4 anyway because that was the deal. Then he went to his own room and lay in the dark, thinking about Wednesday and auditors and a woman who'd somehow become the most important part of his week. His phone buzzed one last time. "Isabella, thank you for tonight. I mean it." Adrian typed back, "You're going to be great on Wednesday. Trust yourself. I'm trying. Try harder." He could almost hear her laugh through the text. Then, "See you Wednesday, Mr. Cross. See you Wednesday, Miss Laurent." Adrian set his phone down and closed his eyes, trying to sleep but knowing it wouldn't come easy. Tomorrow was Tuesday, which meant one more day before everything either worked or fell apart. One more day before he found out if helping Isabella had been the right decision or the worst mistake he'd made in years. Outside, rain started again, tapping against the window like it was trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. Tuesday crawled by like it was deliberately testing Adrian's patience. He spent the morning installing a new panel in a house that smelled like cats and mildew, then the afternoon troubleshooting a faulty circuit in an office building where nobody could agree on when the problem had started or what might have caused it. Normal work. The kind that used to fill his entire world before a rainy Thursday evening had turned everything sideways. He picked Mia up from school at 3, and she immediately launched into a detailed account of how Tyler had finally learned to draw a circle, but it was a really bad circle, and everyone had laughed. Adrian listened and made the appropriate sympathetic noises while his mind stayed stuck on tomorrow morning. They had dinner at 5. Chicken nuggets again because Mia had declared it Nugget Week, and Adrian was too distracted to argue. She did her homework while he pretended to watch TV, and by 7:30 she was in bed, asleep before he'd finished the first chapter of their book. Adrian sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and tried not to check his phone every 30 seconds. Isabella hadn't texted since last night, which probably meant she was preparing or panicking or both. Rachel hadn't reached out either. The silence felt deliberate, like everyone had retreated into their own corners to deal with whatever Wednesday was about to bring. At 9 o'clock his phone finally buzzed, but it wasn't Isabella or Rachel. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cross? This is Martin Chen. I got your number from Isabella. I need to talk to you about tomorrow." Adrian stared at the message, his instinct immediately suspicious. He typed back, "About what?" "About what really happened with the debt restructuring. Can we meet? Tonight?" "Why me?" "Because Isabella trusts you, and because I need someone to hear this who doesn't have a stake in protecting themselves." Adrian looked at the time. He could call Sarah, ask her to come over for an hour. Or he could ignore this, assume it was some kind of manipulation, and deal with whatever Chen wanted to say through Isabella. But something about the message felt genuine. Desperate, maybe. And if there was information that could help tomorrow, Adrian needed to hear it. "Where?" he texted. "There's a coffee shop on Pike, Zeitgeist. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Adrian called Sarah, who agreed to come over despite the late notice. By 9:40, he was driving downtown again, the route becoming familiar in ways that made him uncomfortable. A week ago, he'd never been to this part of the city except for work. Now he could navigate it without GPS. The coffee shop was small and dim, the kind of place that attracted people who wanted to disappear into corners with their laptops. Martin Chen sat at a table in the back, nursing what looked like black coffee and staring at his phone like it held answers he didn't want to find. He looked up when Adrian approached. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of face that suggested he'd spent a career making difficult decisions and was starting to regret most of them. "Mr. Cross," he said, standing to shake hands, "thank you for coming. You said you had information about the restructuring. Right to business. I appreciate that." Chen gestured to the empty chair. "Sit, please." Adrian sat, keeping his expression neutral. Chen took a long drink of his coffee, then set the cup down with the careful precision of someone buying time to organize their thoughts. "I didn't sabotage Nexus Holdings," he said finally, "but I did make a mistake. A big one. And it's been eating at me since I left." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind where you're trying to solve one problem and accidentally create another. About 2 years ago, Isabella's father, Robert Laurent, he was dying. Cancer. He knew he had maybe 6 months, and he was obsessed with making sure the company would survive after he was gone. He asked me to restructure our debt obligations to make them more sustainable long-term. So you did. I tried. The problem was that our lending agreements were a mess. Different divisions had different terms, different covenants, different penalty structures. Robert wanted it simplified, consolidated. So I proposed moving the debt concentration into residential because those properties were long-term investments with stable projected returns. On paper, it made sense. But I didn't account for how it would look if someone examined the structure without understanding the context. I thought the documentation was clear. I thought anyone reviewing it would see the logic. I was wrong. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Isabella called me yesterday and asked directly if I'd deliberately created a structural flaw. And the answer is no. But I did create a flaw. An unintentional one that I should have caught before I left. I've been reviewing the documents since her call, and I can see exactly how the auditors are going to interpret it. They're going to think it was fraud." "Can you prove it wasn't?" Chen pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. "These are internal memos from Robert, emails between us discussing the restructuring, meeting notes that show the decision-making process. Everything that demonstrates this was a good faith effort that went wrong, not a deliberate attempt to deceive lenders." Adrian didn't open the folder. "Why not give this to Isabella directly?" "Because she won't trust it coming from me. She'll think I'm trying to cover my own reputation. But if you give it to her, if you tell her what I said, she might actually use it. You could just show up tomorrow and present it yourself." "I could. But I left Nexus under complicated circumstances. There were disagreements about strategic direction, arguments about Isabella's leadership style. If I show up now, it looks like I'm choosing sides in a board fight. That doesn't help anyone." Adrian studied Chen's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but all he saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine regret. "Why did you really leave?" Adrian asked. Chen was quiet for a moment. "Because I disagreed with how Isabella was running the company. I thought she was too cautious, too focused on maintaining what her father built instead of taking risks to grow it. We fought about it constantly. When a competitor offered me a position, I took it, but leaving doesn't mean I want to see the company destroyed." "Even though you and Isabella didn't get along?" "Especially because of that. Robert Laurent was my friend. He trusted me with his company's future. If it collapses because of something I did, even unintentionally, that betrays everything he stood for." Adrian picked up the folder and opened it. The documents inside were dense with financial terminology he didn't fully understand, but the dates and email chains told a story that matched what Chen was saying. There were memos from Robert Laurent explicitly requesting the debt consolidation, emails where Chen had raised concerns about potential complications, meeting notes where other executives had signed off on the strategy. "This proves the restructuring was approved by multiple people," Adrian said. "Yes. Which means the liability isn't concentrated on Isabella or me. It's a systemic decision that went wrong. That's a much easier position to defend to auditors than deliberate fraud." Adrian closed the folder. "I'll give this to Isabella, but I'm not promising she'll use it. That's all I'm asking. Just make sure she has the option." They sat in silence for a moment, two men who'd been pulled into someone else's crisis and were trying to figure out how to help without making things worse. "Can I ask you something?" Chen said. "Sure." "What's your relationship with Isabella? Rachel mentioned you're some kind of consultant, but I can't find any record of you in the industry. I'm an electrician. Chen blinked. What? I fix electrical systems. Panels, circuits, wiring. I met Isabella by accident last week and somehow ended up helping her figure out how to present this mess to the auditors. You're serious? Completely. Chen started laughing, not mockery, but genuine amusement mixed with something like relief. That's the most Isabella thing I've ever heard. Of course, she'd take advice from an electrician over a room full of financial consultants. Why is that an Isabella thing? Because she's never trusted people who are supposed to have the right answers. She trusts people who actually solve problems. Her father was the same way. He built this company by listening to janitors and maintenance workers, and people who saw how things actually functioned instead of how they looked on paper. Adrian thought about that. It explained why Isabella had been willing to listen to him in the first place, why she'd valued his perspective over the experts around her. She's going to be okay tomorrow, Chen said. Isabella is stronger than people give her credit for. She just needs to remember that strength isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest when things go wrong. I'll tell her you said that. Don't. Let her figure it out herself. She's better when she arrives at conclusions on her own. Adrian left the coffee shop with the folder under his arm, driving through empty streets back to his apartment. Sarah was asleep on the couch again, and Adrian paid her and thanked her and checked on Mia, who was sprawled across her bed in her usual chaotic sleeping position. Then he sat at his kitchen table and texted Isabella. I just met with Martin Chen. He gave me documents that might help tomorrow. Can I bring them by tonight? The response came within seconds. It's almost 11. Can it wait until morning? He says these prove the restructuring wasn't fraud, that it was a legitimate decision that went wrong. A longer pause this time. Come now, I'm still at the office. Of course she was. Adrian called Sarah again, apologizing for the ridiculous night, and promised to pay her double. Then he drove back downtown for the third time in one evening, the city starting to feel like a place he occupied more than his actual home. Isabella was waiting in her office, looking like she'd been there since Monday morning and had forgotten what sleep felt like. She took the folder from Adrian and read through it slowly, her expression unreadable. This changes everything, she said finally. How? Because it shifts the narrative from CEO makes fraudulent decision to company implements approved strategy that has unintended consequences. That's the difference between criminal negligence and correctable error. Chen said he's not planning to show up tomorrow. He thinks it'll look like he's taking sides. He's probably right. Isabella set the folder down and rubbed her eyes. But this gives me something I didn't have before. Context. The auditors will still see the structural flaw, but now I can show them it wasn't created in secret. It was a documented decision made by multiple people in good faith. Does that fix the problem? No. But it changes how the problem is perceived. And in situations like this, perception matters almost as much as reality. She pulled out her laptop and started making notes, incorporating the new information into her presentation. Adrian watched her work, seeing the exhaustion give way to focus, the doubt replaced by determination. You should go home, she said without looking up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. What time do you want me there? 8:30. The auditors arrive at 9. I'll be there. Isabella looked up from her laptop. Adrian, thank you for tonight, for all of this. I know you didn't sign up for any of it. Neither did you. True, but somehow we're here anyway. Yeah, somehow we are. Adrian drove home through the quiet city one more time, his mind already moving forward to tomorrow morning. When he finally collapsed into bed at midnight, sleep came surprisingly easily, his body deciding that worry was less important than rest. Wednesday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect Seattle day that felt like the universe was being ironic. Adrian got Mia ready for school on autopilot, his mind already at Isabella's office, already in the conference room where everything would either work or fall apart. He dropped Mia off at 7:45, kissed her forehead, and told her he loved her. She gave him a look that suggested she knew something big was happening, but wasn't sure she wanted to ask about it. Good luck with work stuff, she said. Thanks, baby. Don't do anything stupid. I'll try. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Adrian parked in the same garage he'd been using all week and took the elevator to the 40th floor, arriving at 8:25. The reception area was busier than he'd ever seen it, people moving with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested something important was about to happen. Rachel met him at the elevator. She looked like she'd slept about as much as Isabella, which was to say, not at all. She's in her office, Rachel said. Fair warning, she's in war mode. Don't take anything personally. War mode? You'll see. Isabella's office door was open. She stood at the windows overlooking the city, wearing a dark suit that made her look like she was about to negotiate a hostile takeover. When she turned, Adrian saw what Rachel had meant. This wasn't the exhausted woman from last night. This was someone who'd decided to win and wasn't interested in alternatives. You're early, she said. Didn't want to risk being late. Good. The auditors are setting up in conference room A. I want you in the observation room next door. There's a video feed so you can watch the presentation. You don't want me in there with you? I want you where you can think clearly. If something goes wrong, if they ask a question I'm not prepared for, I need you to text me the answer. You can't do that if you're sitting at the table trying not to look terrified. Adrian hadn't thought about being terrified, but now that she'd mentioned it, yeah, he was definitely terrified. Rachel appeared in the doorway. They're here. 3 auditors, 2 assistants. They look mean. Good, Isabella said. Mean people are easier to deal with than nice ones. At least you know where you stand. She picked up her laptop and the folder Chen had provided, then looked at Adrian one more time. Whatever happens in there, thank you for getting me this far. You got yourself this far. I just helped you see what was already there. Isabella smiled, brief and genuine, then walked out of the office with the kind of confidence that made Adrian believe she might actually pull this off. Rachel led him to a small room next to conference room A. It had a desk, a monitor showing a video feed of the conference room, and a chair that was significantly less comfortable than the ones where important people sat. I'll be in there with her, Rachel said, but you're her backup. If she needs something, she'll look at the camera. That's your cue. Got it. Rachel left and Adrian sat down to watch. The conference room feed showed Isabella and Rachel on one side of a long table, 3 auditors on the other side. The auditors were exactly what Adrian had expected. Middle-aged, serious, carrying tablets and leather portfolios that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before. The lead auditor was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and glasses that made her look perpetually skeptical. She introduced herself as Margaret Holt, then introduced her colleagues, David something and Jennifer something else. Adrian was too focused on Isabella to catch their last names. Ms. Laurent, Margaret said, thank you for agreeing to this preliminary meeting ahead of our formal audit. We appreciate your cooperation. Of course, Isabella said. I'm committed to complete transparency throughout this process. Margaret's expression suggested she'd heard that line before and didn't believe it. Then let's begin. Our preliminary review of your financial documentation has raised concerns about debt concentration in your residential division. Can you speak to that? Isabella opened her laptop and pulled up her presentation on the screen at the front of the room. Yes. I can not only speak to it, I can provide you with complete documentation of how the concentration occurred, why it's problematic, and what we're doing to correct it. The auditors exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't the response they'd expected. Isabella walked through her presentation with precision. She explained the debt restructuring, showed them the memos and emails from Chen's folder, demonstrated that the decision had been made by multiple executives with board awareness. She acknowledged that the implementation had created an unintended structural flaw, then laid out the comprehensive correction plan. The auditors listened without interrupting, taking notes on their tablets. Adrian watched Isabella's face on the monitor, seeing her maintain perfect composure even when Margaret's expression suggested deep skepticism. When Isabella finished, Margaret sat back in her chair. Ms. Laurent, I appreciate your thoroughness, but what you've presented here is essentially an admission of material misrepresentation in your debt reporting. It's an admission of a structural error, Isabella said. Not fraud. There's a significant difference. The outcome is the same. You've been reporting debt obligations in a way that doesn't reflect the actual liability concentration, which is why we're correcting it. The documents I've provided show this wasn't a deliberate attempt to deceive lenders. It was a good faith restructuring that had unintended consequences. David. Something leaned forward. Good faith doesn't eliminate the violation. Your credit agreements have specific covenants about debt-to-asset ratios. You've been in violation of those covenants for 18 months. Technically, yes, but the violations were invisible until we conducted our own internal review 3 weeks ago. As soon as we identified the problem, we began implementing corrections. Jennifer, something else spoke up. Why should we believe you didn't know about this until 3 weeks ago? This kind of structural issue doesn't appear overnight. Isabella glanced at the camera, brief, almost imperceptible. Adrian's cue. He texted her. The documentation shows when the red flags first appeared. Point them to the timeline. Isabella's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then pulled up a different slide. If you look at the timeline here, you'll see that the reporting discrepancies only became apparent when we cross-referenced 3 separate data sources. Before that, each individual report looked acceptable. The problem was in the aggregate, which we weren't analyzing comprehensively. Margaret studied the timeline. Who identified the discrepancy? Our interim CFO, Rachel Chen. Isabella gestured to Rachel. She was preparing for this audit and noticed that the debt concentration didn't match our credit agreement terms. And your response was to restructure the presentation rather than the underlying problem. Our response was to do both. We're restructuring the presentation to accurately reflect the current situation while simultaneously implementing a reallocation plan to correct the underlying problem. The auditors went quiet, conferring among themselves in low voices that the microphone didn't pick up. Adrian watched Isabella's face on the monitor, seeing her maintain her composure while waiting for a verdict she had no control over. Finally, Margaret spoke. Miss Laurent, we're going to need time to review these documents in detail, but preliminary assessment suggests this may indeed be a structural error rather than deliberate fraud. Isabella nodded, giving away nothing. However, Margaret continued, the fact remains that your company has been in violation of credit covenants for 18 months. That's going to require remediation regardless of intent. We understand. That's why we've prepared a comprehensive correction plan with external oversight at each phase. We'll need to verify that plan, which means this audit is going to take longer than originally scheduled, possibly several weeks. We're prepared to cooperate fully. Margaret closed her tablet. We'll be in touch by end of week with our preliminary findings and a revised audit schedule. In the meantime, I recommend you don't make any major financial decisions without consulting with us first. Understood. The auditors stood, gathering their materials. Isabella and Rachel stood as well, shaking hands with each of them. The whole interaction had taken less than an hour, but Adrian felt like he'd been holding his breath for days. When the auditors left, Isabella collapsed into her chair. Rachel sat down beside her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Rachel started laughing, the kind of exhausted, relieved laughter that came from surviving something you weren't sure you'd make it through. We did it, Rachel said. We actually did it. We survived it, Isabella corrected. There's a difference. Adrian left the observation room and walked into conference room A. Isabella looked up when he entered, and something in her expression shifted from professional relief to something more personal. You heard all that? She asked. Every word. You were incredible. I was terrified. Didn't show. Good. That was the goal. She stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the city. They're going to extend the audit. Dig through everything. It's going to be invasive and exhausting, and probably humiliating. But they didn't call it fraud. Not yet. But they could still change their assessment once they review the documents more carefully. They won't, because everything you showed them is true. And truth is harder to argue with than deception. Isabella turned from the window. When did you get so wise about corporate audits? I'm not wise about corporate audits. I'm just wise about telling the truth and hoping it's enough. Rachel's phone rang, and she stepped out of the room to answer it. Isabella and Adrian stood in the quiet conference room, the morning sun streaming through the windows and making everything look cleaner than it probably was. What happens now? Adrian asked. Now I wait for their preliminary report. Update the board. Continue implementing the correction plan. Try to keep the company running while auditors examine every decision I've made for the past 2 years. Sounds fun. It's going to be a nightmare. Isabella moved closer to him. But it's a survivable nightmare, which is more than I had last Thursday. Last Thursday, you had everything under control. Last Thursday, I thought I had everything under control. There's a difference. Turns out thinking you're in control and actually being in control are two very different states of being. Adrian understood that more than he wanted to admit. His whole life had been built on the illusion of control, that if he just worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, kept everything organized, he could prevent bad things from happening. But Mia's mother leaving had taught him that control was mostly fiction. You did your best and hoped the universe cooperated. Can I ask you something? Isabella said. Sure. What are you doing Friday night? Adrian blinked. What? Friday night. Do you have plans? I mean, no. I usually just hang out with Mia. Maybe watch a movie or something. Why? Because I owe you dinner. A real dinner. Not pizza in a conference room or emergency strategy sessions. Actual food at an actual restaurant where we talk about things that have nothing to do with audits or debt restructuring. You don't owe me anything. I know, but I'm asking anyway. Adrian thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He thought about how different their lives were, how temporary this connection would inevitably be, how getting more involved with Isabella Laurent was probably the worst decision he could make. Then he thought about the way she'd looked at him last night, exhausted and honest, and more real than anyone he'd met in years. Okay, he said, Friday night, but somewhere normal, not the kind of place where entrees don't have prices. Isabella smiled. Deal. I know just the spot. Rachel came back into the room, her expression suggesting whatever call she'd just taken was important. That was Margaret Holt's office. They want to schedule a follow-up meeting for Monday to discuss implementation oversight. Already? Apparently they're taking the correction plan seriously, which is good. It means they believe we're acting in good faith. Isabella and Rachel launched into logistics, and Adrian realized his role in this crisis had reached its natural conclusion. He'd helped get Isabella through the presentation. The rest, the extended audit, the board management, the actual restructuring, that was work for people who actually understood corporate finance. He slipped out of the conference room and made his way to the elevator. He'd almost made it when Isabella caught up with him. You're leaving, she said. Yeah, you've got real work to do now, the kind that requires actual expertise. Adrian, it's okay. I'm glad I could help. But this is your world, not mine. I've got electrical panels to fix and a daughter to pick up from school. Isabella reached out and took his hand. Friday, 7 o'clock. Don't bail on me. I won't. Promise? Promise. She let go of his hand and stepped back, and Adrian saw something in her face that looked like hope mixed with uncertainty. Like she was offering something and wasn't sure if it would be accepted. The elevator arrived, and Adrian stepped inside. As the doors closed, he saw Isabella standing in the hallway, still watching him with that expression that made his chest feel too tight. The ride down 40 floors felt longer than it should have. When Adrian stepped out into the lobby, the normal world rushed back. People hurrying to meetings, delivery drivers hauling packages, the sounds and rhythms of a city that didn't care about audits or debt restructuring or electricians who'd accidentally helped save a billion-dollar company. His phone buzzed. A text from Mia's school. Early dismissal today due to teacher training. Pickup at 1 p.m. Adrian checked the time. 11:30. He had 90 minutes to kill, so he drove to a park near the school and sat in his truck watching people walk their dogs and wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to on Friday. A real dinner. With Isabella Laurent. The woman who controlled millions of dollars and lived in a world where people had drivers and ate at restaurants that didn't list prices. What were they supposed to talk about? What did they even have in common besides a chaotic week of crisis management? But he thought about the way she'd simplified her presentation with Mia's help, the way she'd listened when he spoke even though he had no credentials or expertise, the way she'd admitted she was tired of fighting and had let him see the exhaustion beneath the armor. Maybe that was enough. Maybe common ground wasn't about shared circumstances. Maybe it was about seeing each other clearly and deciding that what you saw was worth knowing better. Adrian picked Mia up at 1 and took her for ice cream, the expensive kind with cookie dough chunks because he'd promised, and she had a memory like a courthouse recorder. They sat outside the shop even though it was cold, and Mia told him about her day and asked if he was done being weird now. Probably not, Adrian admitted. Is it because of the fancy lady? Her name's Isabella, and yeah, kind of. Are you going to see her again? Friday night. Mia considered this while eating ice cream that was definitely going to spoil her dinner. Is she nice? Yeah, she's nice. Does she like kids? I think so. She was good with you on Sunday. Then I guess it's okay if you like her. Adrian hadn't said he liked Isabella, but apparently he didn't need to say it for it to be obvious. Thursday and Friday crawled by in a haze of normal work that felt surreal after everything that had happened. Adrian replaced a panel in Ballard, fixed a circuit in Capitol Hill, installed new outlets in a condo downtown. He went through the motions, did good work, collected payment, but his mind stayed stuck on Wednesday morning and Friday night. Isabella texted him Thursday evening. The board approved the correction plan. We're moving forward with the restructuring. Adrian texted back, "That's great, congratulations. Couldn't have done it without you. You definitely could have, but I'm glad I was there anyway." "Me too." Friday arrived too fast and too slow, time doing that elastic thing it did when you were nervous about something. Adrian dropped Mia off at Sarah's apartment for a sleepover with Sarah's niece, something they'd planned weeks ago that now felt like perfect timing. "Have fun on your date," Mia said as she climbed out of the truck. "It's not a date." "It's definitely a date, Dad." Adrian couldn't argue with that. It definitely felt like a date. He went home and changed clothes 3 times, which was ridiculous because he only owned about 5 outfits that weren't work clothes. He settled on jeans and a button-down shirt that Mia had picked out for him last Christmas. Dark blue with a pattern that was subtle enough to be professional, but not so boring it looked like a uniform. The restaurant Isabella had chosen was in Fremont, a neighborhood Adrian actually knew. Nothing fancy, just a local spot that served good food and didn't make you feel like you were being judged for existing. He arrived at 7:05, fashionably late by accident because traffic had been worse than expected. Isabella was already there, sitting at a table by the window and wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look like a completely different person than the CEO who'd faced down auditors on Wednesday. She looked up when he walked in, and her smile was genuine and warm and slightly nervous. "You came," she said. "I promised I would." People break promises all the time. Not to me they don't, and I try not to break mine. Adrian sat down across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, 2 people who'd been through something intense together and were now trying to figure out what came next. "So," Isabella said, "no work talk. That was the rule. What do we talk about instead?" "Normal things. Life things. Things that have nothing to do with audits or debt restructuring or corporate governance." "I can do that, probably." They ordered food, burgers and fries, simple and perfect, and talked about normal things. Isabella told him about growing up in her father's shadow, always feeling like she had to prove she was worthy of the company she'd inherited. Adrian told her about choosing to be a single father, about the constant juggling act of work and parenting, and trying to build something stable. They talked about books neither of them had time to read, movies they'd meant to watch, places they'd always wanted to visit but probably never would. They talked about small things and big things and everything in between, and somehow 2 hours passed without either of them noticing. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said as they were finishing dessert, apple pie that was better than it had any right to be. "Sure. What made you help me? That first night at the restaurant, you could have walked away, told me it wasn't your problem. But you stayed. Why?" Adrian thought about how to answer that. He could say something simple, something easy, but Isabella deserved better. "Because you looked like someone who was drowning," he said, "and I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to be responsible for things you can't control, to make decisions that affect other people's lives, to lie awake wondering if you got it right. I saw that in you, and I couldn't just walk away from it." Isabella's eyes got wet, and she wiped at them quickly. "Sorry, I'm not usually this emotional." "You're allowed to be emotional. You just saved your company from collapse. That's worth some tears." "I didn't save it alone." "No, but you made the hard calls. You chose transparency when everyone told you to hide the problem. That took guts." They paid the bill. Isabella tried to pay for everything. Adrian insisted on splitting it. They compromised on her paying 60% and walked out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, just a few people wandering past storefronts that were mostly closed for the night. "Thank you for tonight," Isabella said. "For being here. For being you." That's a low bar. Being me is pretty easy. It's not, though. Most people spend their whole lives trying to be someone else. Someone more impressive, more successful, more worthy. You're just yourself. That's rare. They stood on the sidewalk, close enough that Adrian could smell her perfume, something subtle that reminded him of rain and clean air. He thought about kissing her, about closing the distance between them and seeing what happened. But this felt too new, too fragile, like something that needed time to develop into whatever it was going to become. Can I see you again? Isabella asked. Yeah, I'd like that. Next week? After things settle down with the audit? Next week works. They said goodnight, and Adrian watched her walk to her car. Not the black town car with a driver, but a regular sedan that looked like something a normal person would drive. She waved before getting in, and Adrian waved back, feeling like he'd just stepped into a future he hadn't known was possible. The drive home gave him time to process everything. A week ago, he'd been an electrician with a simple life and no complications beyond keeping his daughter fed and making rent on time. Now he was someone who helped billionaires navigate financial crises and went on dates with women who lived in a completely different world. But maybe worlds weren't as separate as they seemed. Maybe a single father from a modest neighborhood and a CEO from a world of wealth and power could find common ground in honesty and vulnerability and the shared experience of being responsible for things bigger than themselves. When Adrian got home, the apartment felt too quiet. He checked his phone and saw a text from Sarah. Girls are asleep. Movie night was a success. Pick her up whenever tomorrow. He texted back his thanks, then sat on the couch in the dark and thought about what came next. The audit would continue for weeks, maybe months. Isabella's company would restructure, implement oversight, prove to lenders that they were acting in good faith. Eventually things would stabilize and return to normal. And Adrian would go back to his regular life, fixing electrical panels, raising his daughter, building something stable out of pieces that never quite fit together perfectly. But something had changed. Some door had opened that he hadn't known was there. Isabella had seen him clearly and decided he was worth knowing better. And he'd seen her, not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the person beneath all that who was tired and scared and trying her best to do the right thing. Maybe that was the real lesson in all of this, that control was mostly an illusion, that perfection was impossible, that the best you could do was be honest about your limitations and trust that honesty was enough, that sometimes the right help came from unexpected places and the right connections happened when you stopped trying to orchestrate everything and just let life unfold. His phone buzzed, a text from Isabella. Thank you for tonight. And for everything this week, you gave me something I didn't know I needed. Adrian typed back. What's that? Someone who sees me clearly and doesn't run away. Running away is not really my style. Good, because I'd like to keep being seen clearly. If you're interested. I'm interested. Then I'll see you next week, Mr. Cross. See you next week, Miss Laurent. Adrian set his phone down and closed his eyes, letting himself feel the weight of the week settle into something manageable. Tomorrow, he'd pick up Mia and they'd go to the aquarium like he'd promised. Next week, he'd see Isabella again, and they'd figure out what this connection between them actually meant. But tonight, sitting in the dark quiet of his apartment, Adrian let himself believe that sometimes walking into the wrong room at the wrong time was exactly where you were supposed to be. That sometimes the people who needed each other found each other in the most unexpected ways. And that sometimes being honest about who you were and what you could offer was enough to change everything. Outside, rain started again, soft and steady, tapping against the windows like it was welcoming him home.